hate asking this question, but I'm sure this has come up at some point. I mean, in certain point of that story, it was implied that he does support some actresses who submit to him, I would say. Do you think that is true, or does he actually deliver?
I think that there was a quid pro quo. You know, one of the I don't know how much of this was feigned, but you know, when the verdict came out in New York, of course, everybody watched the speech that he made, and he seemed shocked. He seemed shocked that, you know, he tried to make this defense that, but I am a protector of women. Like ask all these women filmmakers. I have prospered their careers. They were nobody before I brought them to a platform. And to some extent, that's true. I mean, if you look at the numbers, Miramax was actually, and that's what is devastatingly tragic about this whole situation. Yes, Miramax was a pioneer film studio, and they did champion many young women into careers that they catapulted them into careers that they would not otherwise have had access to. Actually, Harvey's argument that he's a champion of women is true. Unfortunately, he was also a rapist of women, and that doesn't make that right. You know, because you have championed women and you have brought them to prestigious positions, and you have righted a wrong that actually society, unfortunately, is wrong in the first place, to not create an equal opportunity, gender-free. That's the wrong in the first place. So therefore, you leave a vacuum that's open for someone like Harvey. Oh, I'm such a saint. I'm such a savior because I've brought this. Actually, you're just creating correcting an imbalance in the universe. So you're not such a saint, because to be a saint, you'd have to assume that it is the God-given right of men to dominate and the God-given position of women to be subservient, and that is not true. I don't think anyone in this room believes that to be true. You know, the true and correct state is actually creative should have equal opportunity regardless of gender. And so Harvey was really doing what any human being should actually do. It doesn't mean that he then has a right to rape women and to violate them and to take them without consent. And I think that there's been a mismatch. I think when you say, did that truly happen? I think there was a quid pro quo. I think there was a patronage system. And I think that Harvey felt it was his right to take as a result of the favors. There was a favor system happening. And he would say in the middle of an assault, he said to me, this will be over quickly, and then you can do whatever you want. Like, I will give you, if you want to write, I will make your screenplay. If you want to direct, you can direct. If you want to run Asia for me, you can go ahead and do that. It'll be over quickly. In fact, he said just one thrust and it'll all be over, and you can do whatever you want. So there was, when you asked me a question, was there a quid pro quo? There was literally a quid pro quo offered to me in that hotel room that I was not willing to take. I think some people did lie back and think of England or America or wherever they were from and say, you know, it's a transaction. I'll give you a blowjob. You will give me a promotion. This is how the world works. Maybe there were people that did that, but it endangers young women who are not willing to do that. Yes.
I think to him, his world is made by it's like that.
Yeah.
It's already, it's like born with that as well. Like everyone come with a price. That is like his mindset to me. And that's why he's offering a price. Like you take it or not, but if you are not taking it, just means that he can offer a higher price. That's all. Like and he's so wealthy and rich and powerful that he think that he can give you a price that you must accept it at the end.
Right.
He didn't think that. I think to a lot of abuser, it's the same. Like they think that it's just I didn't give you good like advantage enough.
Right.
And that's all. Like it's not about the consent. The consent come with a price.
He has a warped worldview where he believes that everybody comes at a price but has a price, right? Yeah. That's what you're saying. And I think, interestingly enough, I see that. And I think it is unfortunate because after a while of being, and this is true of many people that are uber wealthy. I don't just mean averagely wealthy, right? Not like being a millionaire, more like being a billionaire. If you are in a world of stratospheric wealth, you actually don't know, you can't judge people's interactions with you anymore. They're
Yeah.
so warped. You don't know who your friend is anymore, and who is just a sycophant who's there because you have a ton of money and you have a lavish lifestyle. Even your own romantic partner, are they there because of what you give them, or are they there because they truly love you? I think money is very warping in that way. And so if you live that world, I can easily see how you develop a worldview where everybody has a price. And I think that is, I think what happened in the hotel room in Venice, to me, I was very young and actually very naive and idealistic at 24. It's a clash of worldview, actually. I had a certain set of values, and they were nothing like Harvey Weinstein's values, and his values came up against my values. And because he was so much more powerful than me, he overrode my values, my value system with his value system.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think you can be many things at a time, right? You can be very successful and very good at what you do, but you can also be a monster at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Because I think it's interesting. I was once asked in an interview, how can a man who sponsored such touching movies like Life is Beautiful
Yeah.
and Cinema Paradiso, also be a monster and a rapist? And I gave the same answer as you gave.
Yeah.
I said, people are incredibly complicated.
Yes.
And you can at once be, like Roman Polanski is considered to be a genius of his time. And he has made many movies that people consider to be,
Masterpiece.
The pinnacle of art house movies, masterpieces, exactly. That does not mean he is not also an abuser of women and a rapist and so on. And so it's interesting to me that in society people question that,
Right.
as though there is some doubt that that person could be a monster because of this incredibly emotionally authentic work that they've created. And I am absolutely confident that it's possible to be both.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I'm able to believe that anyone could be capable of many things, including terrible things.
right.
So how do you think right now today, an actress walk into an executive meeting or whatever, how do you think that changes things? How do you think, what will they think right now?
Yeah, I hope that the Me Too movement has done something to empower the powerless. That's really the whole point of the Me Too movement. I hope that an actress walking into a casting call, that studios, okay, in the worst case scenarios, I hope studios are afraid of being sued. And I
Yeah.
hope that they will have a third person in the room because they understand that in these situations where you have a male director or a male producer, that these situations may be risky for young actresses. And so
Yeah.
they put an intimacy coordinator on the set to make sure that these women are protected. They put someone, even in the casting, as early as a casting call, to make sure that nothing untoward happens. And in the worst case scenario, I hope they do that out of fear of being sued. And in best case scenario, I hope they do it because it is the right thing to do and they want women to be safe.
I actually have cover story like this, but in Hong Kong, like movie executive talking about how things were done in the 80s. I'm not even talking
Right.
about now, in the
Yeah.
80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So that was actually not surprising to them that things like that happen. I was actually hoping these questions would be, a little bit different from the others, but because I actually wrote about other people, not just what we're talking about right now. So one thing is, Ashley Judd said speaking out has costed her in terms of her career. In your reality, in your experience, are there things that women can't say but men can? And does speaking out really cost you?
I think, unfortunately, and I wish that we could do something about this, it is still the case that usually, even in this very day in 2024, that the person who speaks out suffers more than the person who has been accused, in the sense that often when this happens, the woman, because it's very often the woman, is in a more subordinate position. They might be lower down in the company rankings. They're frequently speaking out against someone more powerful than them. And I want to say, usually the person who speaks out, the whistleblower, certainly in a corporate environment, is moved to a different job or asked to leave the firm. Even if they're given a sort of settlement, even if they're paid, they end up, suffering more than the person who, has been the subject of the accusations may be have his hands slapped, be disciplined, but generally speaking, if they're more senior in the firm tends to keep them and move the more junior person to a lateral position somewhere else. So I think it's regrettable that whistleblowers are not better protected in a corporate setting. What's fascinating to me is all the detractors online that say, oh, these women, they're just lying. In the reality of speaking out, and I am very much with my fellow Weinstein survivor and friend, Ashley Judd, to say this, in this world of speaking out, women stand to lose so much. Mm-hmm. Why would they come out with a false accusation? It's very, very rare that women will do that because you will lose your peace of mind, your livelihood, potentially your romantic partner, your mental health, your position at work, your job. You may be blacklisted from the industry you've worked in. The repercussions are so enormous, such a tsunami of repercussion, that no one in their right mind would do this unless it were A, the truth, and B, they were doing it because they hoped to stop that predator from assaulting other women in the same way.
I think that's also one of the things that the movie depicted quite well, in terms of how difficult it is for victims to speak out.
Yeah, very much so.
And my next question actually isn't about the case. Sharon Stone spoke out and suggested that Kevin Spacey was cancelled and that he should be allowed to come back, to return to the industry. So how do you think we should be treating people who were legally acquitted?
Legally acquitted.
Yeah.
Ha.
I mean, we can
Brilliant
talk. We can name people. We can actually talk about Spacey or whatever.
Yeah. Legally acquitted. That's a really good question.
Because Sharon Stone wasn't the only person, right?
Yeah.
I think there were other people, including Liam Neeson, Stephen Fry, who were actually speaking out in terms of
defense of Spacey.
In defense of Spacey. So how do you think, as a society, we should be treating people who were not legally
convicted?
Yeah. Great question. That's such a complicated question. I know, because the problem is, I think you know what I'm going to say. The problem is with being legally acquitted is that the legal system itself is deeply flawed, right? So it's very, very hard to get a rape conviction. I mean, frankly, the fact that Harvey went to jail over so many women who spoke out against him is nothing short of an absolute miracle. So I think that there are many false negatives. I can never remember which round it is, but I just think there probably are many miscarriages of justice where the justice system says, no, I don't think we have enough evidence to demonstrate that this person is guilty. But actually, that doesn't mean they didn't do terrible things. And so consequently, that concept of legally acquitted, I think it just depends on how much faith you have in the legal system to truly be an arbiter of justice. And I actually am sorry to say, despite having gone to law school, I don't have a strong belief in the legal system as an arbiter of justice, which is regrettable, especially not for women. We discussed in the room yesterday about how the legal system is not set up to defend the weaker, that the oppressed, the vulnerable. The legal system doesn't defend that. And so consequently, what is an acquittal worth? At the same time, if you say, oh, but the legal system doesn't mean anything, you can't entirely throw it out, because then we end up with a civil society that is chaos, right? The rule of law is necessary for a civil society. So it's a very complicated question, because I believe that we have to work in the confines of the legal system. When they overturned the New York verdict, many media organizations called me up and asked for comment at that time. Donna Rutuno, who was Harvey's lawyer, I did appear on a show with her, and she seemed to be trying to make the argument that Weinstein survivors are speaking out against the legal system, that they are saying that there is no such thing as a rule of law. And no, my position is much more nuanced than that. I believe in the rule of law because I'm a lawyer, or I went to law school, and I believe that we cannot have a just and civil society without one of the core tenets, which is the legal system. However, I simultaneously believe that the legal system is flawed in favor of the oppressor, and it is, very difficult for the weaker party, the oppressed, the vulnerable, to get justice, which isn't the same as saying do away with law. We don't need law. It is saying, no, I respect the legal system. I believe it should be in place. The tenets of the rule of law are deeply important, or otherwise we lose civil society and we live in chaos and anarchy. But there still is room for no institution is perfect. Even the institutions that should be upheld, there is room for reform in the law without throwing it out completely.
So about the spacey, and it's also part of the justice, like the Me Too as well. Like, is it silencing someone or cancel culture? I think the people have questions. Is it really a mean to achieve justice? So, but to everyone have the different standard. Like, to me, maybe the abuser silenced or cancelled for 1 year is enough, but to the victim, maybe not. So,
right,
it's very hard.
Right. What does justice look like? I think is a really difficult question. It's because justice does look different for different people. So. It's complicated, and for cancel culture, some people say it's not enough and some people say it's too much. And so where do you draw the line in that? I think it's very difficult. I don't have a good answer for that other than I think it's good that we raise these questions because they are relevant, right? That I want there to be public and social discourse about this. I think that's really important. I think it's also important to sit with that nuance, to know that we don't always have the answers to these really complicated, life questions.
I mean, that was, I mean, you already answered it. I mean, because that was also the follow-up question that I was going to ask. I'm not sure if I'm quoting Sharon Stone incorrectly, but I think part of the defense was also the severity of what Spacey did. It's I mean in putting it in a light way, it was groping. So I think they were kind of commenting on that severity, and that should also be taken into consideration whether one person should be cancelled. So I agree. I mean, it's very complicated. Like what's enough, and what are we representing if we let him back in the industry, or on the other hand, I do find sometimes media could be careless in terms of what they say about allegations.
That's right. And that's why sometimes there are miscarriages of justice, because in fact, Harvey's legal team in LA attempted to argue that because the LA trial took place at the same time as She Said was released, the movie, they actually said it was prejudicial because She Said was so much in the press at the time that the court of public opinion had already deemed Harvey guilty before the jury was able to, make a true legal pronouncement about it. And so that's very complicated, that the relationship between the legal system and the media and the court, the actual court, the court of legality and the court of public opinion, that's a very complicated dynamic.
That was actually also another follow-up question, because one of Weinstein's conviction was actually dropped. So,
correct.
So what can we learn about legal battles in sexual assault cases from that?
The New York verdict was overturned on a technicality, and the technicality was about the use of secondary witnesses. What's really interesting, and what the nuances of the legal system that people outside of America may not fully understand, is under California law, actually, there is no, it is the right to use secondary witnesses is enshrined. So Harvey's legal team will not be able to finagle the same, technicality in California as they have in New York. All I can say about what happened in New York is, despite the fact that Harvey is in Rikers, he still has access to a lot of money. He can still, work on his appeal. And if you can pay appeal lawyers, they will overturn every stone to find a tiny technicality that you can overturn a verdict on. The appeal court, I think there were 5 people, and they were split like 3-2. Like 2 people said no, we should uphold the verdict, and 3 people said no, we're going to overturn the verdict. I think that's correct. I know that it was narrow, and there've been rumors that it's so ludicrous. Were those 3 judges on the appeal court even bribed? People were like shocked at it. Just seems ridiculous. One thing is true, that we were talking about the court of public opinion, but it's true that a number of memes went around, social media memes went around at that time to say, wait, Harvey Weinstein's verdict has been overturned because too many women came forward with testimonies about how he was a terrible person to them. Like, it just seems logically to not make any sense.
Since we're talking about that, who else do you think would be responsible for things like that? I mean, we name a lot of people, but who do we think that should be legally held responsible in order to prevent something like this?
There was some discussion around the time after Harvey got carted off to jail. People were like, well, who is now going to hold the enablers accountable? And you're right, there's a wide circle, but do we hold his brother who wrote the checks? Do we hold his personal lawyer who negotiated the NDAs in full knowledge that these young women were being assaulted? Do we hold the board of directors at Miramax responsible? Do we even hold the Walt Disney Company, which owned Miramax and supposedly stood for family values and child-friendly, approach, responsible, given that they knew what Harvey was like, but because he made the money, they kind of turned a blind eye. I think the list of people that you could potentially hold responsible is limitless, actually. And to what extent, where do you draw the line? To what extent do you say at some point, actually, the culpability becomes less and less with different layers? So where do you say enough is enough? I don't have a good answer to that, except to say that I think there is a certain amount of responsibility that should be laid at the feet of the enablers, because they knew what they were doing and they let Harvey get away with it.
Maybe it's easier to say what items, like the NDAs itself, shouldn't be allowed or legal, maybe.
Right, that's right. And so a lot of work has been done, especially by my former colleague, Zelda Perkins, whose nonprofit organization, Can't Buy My Silence, has done a lot of work in this regard in terms of questioning and challenging the legality of non-disclosure agreements, which incidentally were originally a legal document to cover intellectual property, but has morphed into a protection for people who commit crimes in a place of work. And that was never the original intent of a non-disclosure agreement. And I think it is still true that really a non-disclosure agreement should be narrowly defined as something that protects intellectual property without its wider usage as a way of covering up crime in the workplace.
I'm not sure if you can answer this, but is it different in other cultures, like in Hong Kong or in Asia? Do corporations behave differently, or are sexual assaults perceived in differently?
I think it's quite different.
I think so too. I'm interested to hear from Amy. Tell us how you think it's different.
Well, Hong Kong film studio or any kind of filmmaking company here actually is not that well established as in US. Like we are pretty 山寨, to be honest.
In terms of corporate structure, you mean?
Yeah, and also law and order, but you don't even have labor law in Hong Kong. Like all kind of abusive behavior, we kind of allowed it in film industry, and also in Hong Kong, it's a lot. Like I experienced it by myself, and also I also witnessed the experience that I share with you. Like it's so similar by those people in power who were sexually assaulted the girl who was not in power, but he can get away so easily, and it's allowed by all the people around us. And at that time, I was so shocked to I think there's a crime, it's a criminal act, and why you see that it's nothing. You just pay the girl and ask her to leave the unit. We still have a long way to go, I think. To me, first of all, have the labor union first, and then you can have the better labor law, and then you can but that is also in a lot like besides the film industry, a lot of corporates in Hong Kong didn't follow much about this kind of protection. They don't have any protection for for their employees as well.
I also think, as well as all that, which is very valid, I also think there's a cultural difference, in attitudes to sexual assault. In speaking with many, I've inadvertently become a bit of a face for an Asian sexual assault survivor. And sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes I think, couldn't I just be a regular sexual assault survivor rather than being known as the Asian sexual assault survivor of Harvey Weinstein? But I think it has meant that women of color who have been sexually assaulted are drawn to my story. And so I consequently have spoken to a lot of people of Asian heritage who themselves have experienced a sexual assault. And I think there's a whole other complicated layer of what culturally Asian cultures is considered to be the norm. If you speak out about sexual assault and if you complain, actually, do you bring shame on your family and your community is much more of a consideration that seems to be pervasive among Asian sexual assault survivors, perhaps more than if you are from an more individualistic orientated Western society. Now, it doesn't mean that's absent entirely from US or UK culture or other Western communities, but I think there's a less of that happening. I think there's more of a consideration of yourself as part of a wider community and certainly for your immediate family. And I also think there is just less of a culture here of speaking out in general, but there's also less of a culture here of speaking out about matters to do with sex, healthy sexual relations, unhealthy sexual relations. There is, people don't discuss this openly, and therefore I think it's very difficult to come forward with allegations of a sexual nature. Certainly they're situated within an honor-shame dynamic.
Is it going to cost you to speak out?
I always want to speak out,
And you do, right? I mean, you don't just do it.
I thought of, I always, we always talk about that among our friends and then about all the abusive behavior we witness throughout the time. And we always think of set up some secret group and Facebook page. Anonymously sharing the behavior we saw and so that's, but we haven't done that yet because it's so a small circle. It's such a small circle. You know who you are. Everyone knows that. So
everyone knows it, but then that's terrible. I mean, what is actually going to be done? How do we bridge the gap between something that's an open secret and actual action? For a very long time, Harvey Weinstein was an open secret, right? We may not have known that he was a serial rapist. We may not have known the extent of his sexual crimes, but certainly we already knew of him as a bad person. All the women would warn to stay away from him. He's really handsy. He's a bit of a, he'll come on to you. The euphemisms galore. He's like a bit of a lech is the British expression, meaning he's a little bit lecherous. So there were all of these euphemisms that actually sort of diminished what he did. He basically is a rapist. Let's call it what it is. But there are all sorts of words that are used in society, and I think actually that's part of the shame culture as well. You don't directly confront the idea he's a rapist. You just say he's got wandering hands. What does that even mean, right? I think call an egg an egg, say what it is.
From the perspective of a host of a podcast, it's actually quite difficult to get people to talk about things here in Hong Kong. Even if it's not about sex, right?
Totally.
As long as you're still in the industry, people are like, "Oh, can we say this behind the screen, behind the scenes?"
Right.
I mean that
and
happens.
I have the privilege of being an outsider to Hong Kong, of being able to come here. I have no repercussions. I fly away on Wednesday, so I have no repercussions. I'm not afraid to say this. But I also have been given credibility by the New York Times and the wider Me Too movement. There's nothing about the Weinstein story that hasn't been picked over and discussed on innumerable interviews and podcasts. And so therefore, I feel that there are no holes barred. There's no question that's too outlandish now that, everything has already been trampled over. And it's very, in some ways, yes, it's a loss of privacy that we discussed about earlier, but it's also very freeing, right? There's no, I feel I can discuss this openly now because there are no secrets anymore within the Weinstein story. Everything has been discussed at some point by a lawyer, by a journalist, by a television anchor. You know, it's all out there.
The TV series from Taiwan, the 人選之人, I forgot the English name of it, but initiate a wave of like Me Too accusation against some celebrities in Taiwan.
Right.
At that time, it's like growing so rapidly. Like, and then I hope that it will be happening in Hong Kong or China as well. But it didn't. Like, I thought it would be. Like, we talked about that yesterday with some fellows as well. So we're surprised to see no one even speak in Hong Kong, even though the Taiwanese has been talking about it.
Yeah.
So it's like, because the circle is, I think the culture
The
as well.
culture and
then you, like, even though victim, I knew they were still in the industry, how can they spoke out? And like, when they spoke out, they lost all they gain in the industry. Like, they have been working so hard for years.
Right,
like the beautiful ladies who were talented as well. Like they
it's
have
really
to,
tragic.
it's very hard for them to say, and it was part of, it will be easier to see it's part of the work as well. You know, how you getting hard group. So it is in front of my eyes, you know.
Right. I think the repercussions are so huge, and this is what people don't understand about it. You know, we were talking about the Matthew Perry case as well. Yeah. People constantly are, when you talk about assistants who have very little power, or actresses as well who have very little power, I think the world doesn't understand. They say, why don't you just go and get another job? Yeah. And I was very much like, yeah, sure, I'll just go down the corridor and find the next media mogul who's going to be super nice to me. So, you know, first you are confronted with an industry where there's abuse that's rampant throughout the industry. Harvey Weinstein was not the only one. He may have been an extreme case, but it isn't the case that I would have gone to another studio and worked for a perfectly nice guy, because they didn't really exist. But not just that. If you screw up on this one job, you're not just losing the job, you're potentially losing all of your association with the entire industry, which absolutely happened to me. I was completely blacklisted when I left Miramax, and I never, ever worked in film again. Nobody ever gave me a job. By the way, interestingly, people are like, why don't you get back in the film industry today? And I'm like, you think that's easy? People are not lining up to give me work still, because I'm a whistleblower, right? Even like 20 years later, even though people on the one hand are proud of us and what we have achieved, there's still like, no one's like trying to get me work in the film industry. So there is a sort of stigma, of course, that, and then you lose that completely. One, the repercussions of speaking out are so huge, and then you secretly are saying to yourself, in the moments before you speak out, you're like, society diminishes women so much that women naturally diminish themselves. So what happens in a case of sexual assault is, maybe it wasn't such a big deal. I mean, maybe I imagined it. Maybe like
I'm overreacting.
Right, I'm overreacting. I'm being over emotional. It was an accident. He didn't mean to brush my breast, or you know, I surely imagine when he grabbed my buttocks. Maybe he was drunk at the time. You know, I think there's a whole mountain of excuses that society makes for predatory men that women internalize, and so when they themselves are the survivor, they can't help but saying, on the one hand, I could lose my job, my livelihood, my association with this industry completely, so that's massive. On the other hand, maybe it wasn't such a big deal. So you're on the one hand minimizing something, and on the other hand, you're really pessimistically thinking this could be huge. You're maximizing something on the one hand and maximizing the downside, minimizing the upside.
And I do feel that there is a difference in terms of culture and region. I mean, in Hong Kong, there's always the feeling. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, but people are always feel like, oh, Hong Kong is so small. Whatever you say, people will know. It's such a small society.
Come back to bite you in the bottom.
I mean, in that case, it might be different from say Taiwan. And I do find, I mean, it's a very careless comparison, but I mean, I do find when I speak to Taiwan guests from Taiwan, they are actually more outspoken and braver in terms of telling their personal stories. And I mean, some will say, because I mean, it's a bigger place, but I do think that it has also have to do with how judgmental maybe internet can be, or people can be. I'm not saying it's an absolute truth there, but I mean, it's how we feel, right, in Hong Kong. Right. I mean, I personally, I don't actually think that people in Hong Kong who are outspoken have any severe consequences. I don't feel that, but it's the fear. It's the fear of that.
Yeah, and we are all taught to be submissive,
Right.
and you don't be their troublemakers, and that is like every time, like if you file any complaint, actually you're the troublemakers, and like so that is like the biggest punishment to you, like to be a troublemaker, like you lose your career.
But that's the thing, right? Because obviously you talk about it with your peers, you talk about it with your friends.
Yeah.
You basically talk about it with anyone in a lot of occasions, except when it's open in public.
Right.
So yeah, that's also interesting. I actually think we did pretty well. We almost did.
I just we're thinking it's always the very good step to like. There's a lot of progress. After all this year, especially in the recent after Me Too, actually it's very encouraging and empowering. I told you I left the filmmaking industry because there's so much problem I've seen and I cannot change it. And that's why, and I cannot, I don't know whether my ex-college will hear that. It's like, I cannot really work with those people again. In this industry where everyone witness it and then you keep silence and you're still working with those people. I personally cannot accept it. So I even thought of quitting it, but now I changed the path and to the journalistic work and also to documentaries. So more sophisticating people.
Yeah. Well, I really admire, your comeback, right? You've refused to let that bar you from a creative life, and you've just found another channel for your creativity. But
I'm very blessed to have this opportunity. Not everyone can. Like I think a lot of my ex-college cannot. Like they don't. Maybe they were really loving movie.
Right. Yeah,
like this,
as I did.
I love movie as well. But I think that I can always choose a better working environment. So like it's really toxic. Yeah. It's really toxic in Hong Kong, I would say. I think it's much. I think it might be much better now. Like after this new generation of director of filmmaker came out, and like we grew up in the Me Too movement, like 2006, 17 is already 7 years. So the new director actually grew up with all this talking about the Me Too and the balancing power. So I think it's getting better. So I still have hope. Like even though I probably cannot go back to work with the same group of people.
So thank you very much to both for sharing so much. Thank you, thank you, Rowena.
Very honored to have the opportunity to talk to you both. Actually,
thank you. So just one last question, I guess, is what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm writing a memoir, which I hope will see publication. I've been working on it for a long time. Actually, I started working on it when we went into lockdown in the US in March 2020. I originally actually received interest about writing a book when I first broke my story on the NBC Today show on September the 9th, 2019. It was the first time that my name was known in public. And then within a month, on October the 5th, I wrote an op-ed, the one entitled Harvey Weinstein Told Me He Liked Chinese Girls. And I got offers to write a book that extended the op-ed from that moment, so from October 2019. Because I was doing a lot of travel with the She Said book tour at that time, I didn't really get the chance to sit down until we all went into lockdown in March 2020, and then I had too much time on my hands and lots of children running around my house. So I thought, what a great idea, I'm going to write a book. So anyway, I did start work on the book in March 2020. And at first, when I started work on the book, I was very optimistic. I thought, I'll just knock out a book and it'll be published in 6 months. And of course, it didn't happen like that. And now it's been through many revisions and many potential editors and publishers and agents and so on in that world, murky world of literary publications. That is something I'm working on that I hope will see the light of day soon. I don't know where the journey of advocacy and activism will take me. I'm very encouraged to be able to bring my story to Asia. I came to Singapore last year and I came to Hong Kong this year. And as I was sharing with Amy, it is obviously personally very meaningful to me to bring my Me Too story back to Asia. And I have a special heart for speaking out on behalf of Asian sexual assault survivors, just because there are so few voices in this area. And so this is an area where I hope to grow my advocacy work with the Me Too movement. And we'll see. I'll come back next year and let you know how that's going.
And I hope that's easier for you the next time you come to
Thank you.
Hong Kong. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. And and in case anyone wants to talk to you, is that okay? Is that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I am very available on social media. I have my messages are open on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, X, TikTok, Threads. So I can be found on social media under my real and actual name, Rowena Chiu.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Of
Rowena.
course.
Yeah, thank you for being here with us and
it's
share
been a
this
delight.
really touching and empowering stories.
Yeah.
And thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yay.